glad you came, Clark. I wasn't sure you could get away. I managed a few days. Things are quiet right now. Clark hesitated. But you're sure about this, Raymond? It's actually safe? The two men were walking slowly along the terrace outside Raymond's house. The sun hung low over the mountains, dull red, throwing no shadows. The air was still. From the woods above the hill came the soft call of doves, and below, the river wound through the valley as a thin white mist began to rise off the water. Raymond turned to him. Safe? Of course it's safe. The operation itself is simple. Any surgeon could do it. And there's no danger at any other point? None. No physical danger at all. You have my word. You're always nervous, Clark. But you know my work. 20 years I've spent on this. People called me a crank, a fraud, a fool. I always knew I was right. 5 years ago I reached the end of it, and every day since has been preparation for tonight. I want to believe it's true. Clark frowned. But are you certain, Raymond, that the whole theory isn't just a beautiful dream, a vision, and nothing more? Raymond stopped walking and turned sharply. He was middle-aged, gaunt, pale, but there was color in his face now. Look around you, Clark. The mountains, the woods, the fields. Me, standing here, talking to you. You think all of this is real. I'm telling you it isn't. All of it. Every star. The ground under our feet. It's a screen. A set of shadows, hiding the real world from us. There is a real world, but it's on the other side of all this, behind the curtain. I don't know if any human being has ever pulled that curtain back, but I know that you and I are going to watch it happen tonight, to someone else. Clark shivered. The mist off the river had turned cold. The ancients understood it, Raymond went on. They had a name for pulling the curtain back. They called it seeing the God pan. Clark felt the cold sink deeper into him. It's incredible, Raymond. If it's true, we're standing on the edge of a whole other world. He swallowed. And the knife? That's really necessary? Yes. A tiny cut in the gray matter. A microscopic rearrangement of a few cells. Something 99 brain surgeons out of 100 would never even notice. I won't bore you with the science. Just understand this. There's a group of nerve cells in the brain that no one can explain. Even now. Empty ground. A blank on the map. I'm not like the other specialists, Clark. I know exactly what those cells are for. And with one touch, I can switch them on. One touch, and for the first time since the human race began, a person's spirit will look straight at the spirit world. He said it quietly. Clark, Mary will see the God pan. Clark leaned closer and whispered something. No, Raymond said. That's nonsense. It's better this way. I'm certain. Think it through, Raymond. It's an enormous responsibility. If something goes wrong, you'll never forgive yourself. I don't think so, even if the worst happened. Raymond's voice didn't change. I took Mary out of the gutter when she was a child, saved her from starving. Her life is mine, to use as I see fit. Come on, it's getting late. He led Clark inside, down a long dark hallway, and unlocked a heavy door. The lab had once been a billiard room. A gray light came down through a glass dome in the ceiling. Raymond lit a shaded lamp and set it on a table in the middle of the floor. The walls were lined with shelves, bottles and jars of every shape and color, and at the far end of the room stood a strange-looking chair. Clark looked at it and raised his eyebrows. Yes, that's the chair. Raymond wheeled it into the light and began adjusting it, lowering the seat, tilting the back, setting the footrest. It looked comfortable enough. The seat was soft green velvet. Sit down, Clark. Get comfortable. I've got a couple hours of work to do first. Clark sat in the shadows and watched him bend over a row of little bottles and light a flame under a glass dish. After a while, he noticed a smell in the room. Faint at first, then stronger. Not chemical, the way he'd expected. Something else. And then, without meaning to, he started to drift. He found himself thinking of a day 15 years ago. A blazing hot afternoon in August, walking through the woods and fields near his childhood home. The heat, the shimmer rising off the grass, the endless hum of summer. It came back to him so vividly it blotted out the room. "Hope the smell doesn't bother you," Raymond said somewhere far off. "Nothing wrong with it. Might make you a little drowsy, that's all." Clark heard him, but he couldn't move. He was deep in the memory now. The last walk he'd ever taken through those woods. The scent of flowers and warm earth, water dripping somewhere on stone. And the dream shifted. The beech trees became something older, stranger, vines climbing between the branches. And then, all at once, the summer sounds cut out. Total silence. And for one moment he stood face to face with a presence, something that was neither a man nor an animal, neither living nor dead. The shape of everything, and yet with no shape at all. And a voice seemed to say, "Let us go." And then darkness, the darkness beyond the stars. He woke with a jolt. Raymond was stoppering a small green bottle. "You dozed off," he said. "The trip must have worn you out. It's done. I'm going to bring Mary in. 10 minutes. Clark sat there, dazed, half expecting the walls to melt. Then the door opened, and Raymond came back, and behind him came a girl of about 17, dressed all in white. She was so beautiful that Clark understood now everything Raymond had written to him. "Mary," Raymond said, "it's time. You're completely free to choose. Are you willing to trust me, all the way?" "Yes." "You hear that, Clark? You're my witness." He gestured to the chair. "Sit down, Mary. Lean back. Ready?" "Yes, quite ready." She smiled at Raymond. "Give me a kiss first." He bent and kissed her kindly enough. "Now close your eyes." She closed them, like a child ready for sleep. Raymond lifted the green bottle to her face. Her skin went white, whiter than her dress. She struggled faintly, then folded her arms across her chest, calm, giving in. The lamplight fell full on her. Clark watched expressions drift across her face like cloud shadows on a hillside. Then she lay still. Raymond checked her eyes. She was completely unconscious. He pressed a lever and the chair sank back. Clark saw him cut away a small circle of her hair, like a monk's tonsure. He drew a small bright instrument from a case, and Clark turned away, sick. When he looked again, Raymond was already bandaging the wound. "She'll wake in 5 minutes." He was perfectly calm. Nothing to do now but wait. The minutes crawled. Somewhere in the hall a clock ticked, slow and heavy. Clark felt faint. His knees wouldn't hold him. Then a long, drawn-out sigh. The color rushed back into the girl's face. Her eyes opened. Clark flinched away from them. They shone with a terrible light, staring at something far away. Wonder spread across her whole face, and her hands reached out to touch something that wasn't there. Then the wonder collapsed into pure terror. Her face twisted. She shook from head to foot, as if something inside her was fighting to get out. It was horrible. Clark rushed forward as she dropped screaming to the floor. 3 days later, Raymond took him to her bedside. She lay wide awake, rolling her head from side to side, smiling at nothing. There was nothing behind her eyes anymore. "Yes," Raymond said, still calm. "It's a terrible shame. Her mind is gone. There's no getting it back. But it couldn't be helped." He looked down at her. "And after all, she has seen the great god Pan." Clark was a strange mix of caution and curiosity. In daylight, sober, he wanted nothing to do with the weird or the occult. But underneath, in secret, he was hungry for exactly that, for everything hidden and strange in the world. It was that hunger that had made him accept Raymond's invitation, and the horrors he'd seen in that gray laboratory had, in a way, been good for him. They'd scared him straight. For years afterward, he clung to the ordinary and turned his back on anything supernatural. But it didn't last. Bit by bit, as Mary's convulsed face faded from his memory, the old hunger came back. He had a private habit. In the evenings, after dinner, with the fire warm and a good bottle of wine at his elbow, he'd sit down at an old Japanese desk. Its drawers were stuffed with documents on the most disturbing subjects imaginable. And in one drawer was a thick handwritten book, his life's collection. He called it his memoirs to prove the existence of the devil. He had contempt for anything printed. A ghost story stopped interesting him the moment it appeared in a book. His pleasure was in collecting the real accounts, compiling them, rereading them late into the night. One ugly December evening, black fog outside, hard frost, he opened the book to the newest entry and began to read it over for the 10th time. At the top, in larger writing, he'd noted, "A strange account told to me by my friend, Dr. Phillips. He swears every fact is completely true, but won't give the real names of the people involved or the place where it happened." The account went like this. There were 3 people in the story. Helen V., who, if she's still alive, would be about 23 now. Rachel M., a year younger, now dead. And Trevor W., a young man of 18 whose mind had been broken. At the time, all 3 lived in a village on the Welsh border. An old place, important back in Roman times, now just a scattered hamlet of maybe 500 people, on high ground a few miles from the sea, sheltered by a big forest. About 11 years ago, Helen came to the village under odd circumstances. She was an orphan, taken in as a baby by a distant relative. When she turned 12, he decided she needed children her own age around her, and paid a well-off local farmer, Mr. R., to board her. His one instruction: Helen was to have her own room, and was to be left completely alone to spend her time however she liked. Her education, he said, was already handled. Mr. R. picked her up from the station. He noticed nothing strange about her, except that she wouldn't talk about her past, and that she didn't look like the local people. Her skin was a pale, clear olive. Her features were sharp and somehow foreign. She settled in easily. The village children liked her, and sometimes went with her into the forest, which was her one real passion. She'd leave right after breakfast and not come back till dark. When Mr. R wrote to her guardian, uneasy about a young girl alone in the woods all day, the reply was short. Helen does as she pleases. It was on one of those walks that the first strange thing happened, about a year after she arrived. That summer was brutally hot. On one of the hottest days, Helen went into the forest as usual, heading for the old Roman road that runs along the highest part of the wood. Men in the field saw her go, and were startled that she'd taken her hat off, though the sun was already fierce. A laborer, Joseph W., was working in the forest nearby. Around noon, his little boy, Trevor, 7 years old, brought him his lunch. Afterward, the boy wandered off to pick flowers, and his father could hear him shouting happily in the distance, so he wasn't worried. Then the shouting turned to screaming. Joseph dropped his tools and ran toward the sound. He met his son running the other way, white with terror. Once the boy could speak, he said he'd gotten tired, lain down in the grass, and fallen asleep, and been woken by a strange noise, a kind of singing. And when he'd looked through the branches, he'd seen Helen, out in a clearing, playing with a strange naked man. He couldn't describe the man any better than that. He'd been too frightened. He'd just run. Joseph found Helen sitting alone in the clearing. He accused her of scaring his boy. She flatly denied it, and laughed at the story of the strange man, and Joseph half believed her. He figured the boy had just woken up frightened, the way children do. But Trevor wouldn't let it go. For weeks he was nervous and strange, refusing to go out alone, waking in the night screaming, "The man in the wood, Father, Father." In time it seemed to fade. 3 months later, Trevor went with his father to the home of a local gentleman Joseph sometimes worked for. The boy was left sitting in the front hall while the men talked. A few minutes later, a shriek and the sound of a fall. They ran out and found Trevor unconscious on the floor, his face twisted with terror. When he came around, he was pointing at something and screaming the old words, "The man in the wood." They looked where he was pointing and saw a carved stone head set into the wall above a doorway. The owner had recently dug it up while renovating. It was clearly Roman, and the experts who examined it agreed on what it showed. It was the head of a faun, a satyr. Dr. Phillips told me he'd seen the head himself. He said he'd never encountered such a vivid impression of pure evil. Whatever it was, that second shock finished the boy. To this day, his mind has never recovered. The second event connected to Helen happened about 6 years ago, and it's stranger still. That summer, Helen became unusually close with a local farmer's daughter, Rachel M., a year younger, and thought by most to be the prettier of the two. They were inseparable. Rachel's parents didn't mind the friendship. Everyone assumed Helen would inherit money someday, and even encouraged it. They deeply regret that now. Helen still loved the forest, and Rachel started going with her, out early, back at dusk. A few times afterward, Rachel's mother thought her daughter seemed off, dreamy, languid. Not herself, but it seemed too small a thing to worry about. Then one evening she heard what sounded like crying from Rachel's room. She went in and found her daughter half undressed on the bed, in terrible distress. The moment Rachel saw her, she cried out, "Mother, why did you let me go to the forest with Helen?" And then she told her mother a wild story. At that point in the account, Clark shut the book with a snap. because he remembered the night his friend Phillips had sat in that very chair and told him all this out loud, and remembered how, right around here, he'd cut him off, sick with horror. "My God," he'd said, "think about what you're saying. It's too monstrous. Things like that can't happen in this quiet world, where people just live and die and grieve and get by. Not this. There has to be some other explanation, because if a thing like this were possible, our whole world would be a nightmare." But Phillips had finished the story anyway, and ended it like this. Her disappearance is still a mystery. She vanished in broad daylight. They saw her walking in a meadow, and a moment later, she simply wasn't there. Clark sat by the fire and tried to picture it all again, and again his mind recoiled at the thought of something that unspeakable wearing human skin. He saw the green forest road his friend had described, the swaying leaves, the shifting shadows, the sunlight and the flowers, and far off, two figures walking toward him. One was Rachel, but the other... At the end of the account, in his book, Clark had written a single line of Latin, "Et diabolus incarnatus est, et homo factus est," and the devil was made flesh, and was made man. "Herbert, my God, is that you?" "Yes, my name's Herbert. I know your face too. Can't place the name though. My memory's not good anymore." Villiers, from college. "So it is. Sorry. I didn't realize I was begging from an old friend. Good night." "Hold on. There's no need to rush off. Let's walk a bit." "But, Herbert, in God's name, how did you end up like this?" "It's a long story, Villiers. A strange one. You can hear it if you want." The two of them made an odd pair moving up the street, one in filthy rags, the other in the polished clothes of a well-off man about town. Villiers had just come out of a good dinner and paused by the restaurant door, doing what he loved best, watching the London streets for something strange to happen. He fancied himself an expert on the city's dark corners. And then a whining voice at his elbow had begged him for money, and he'd turned to find the strangeness he was always hunting for standing right beside him. It was Charles Herbert. They'd started college the same day, 12 terms together, young and clever and happy. Villiers hadn't seen him in 6 years. And now here he was, a wreck of a man, his face ruined by poverty and something worse. They walked in silence for a while, drawing stairs, until Villiers steered them into a quieter street in Soho. Then he asked again, "How did it happen, Herbert? I always heard you were coming into a fine estate down in Dorset. Did your father cut you off?" "No. I got everything when he died, a year after I left Oxford. He was a good father. I mourned him. But you know how young men are. I came up to town, went into society. I had good introductions. I enjoyed myself, harmlessly enough. And then, my second season, the tide turned." He paused. "You heard about my marriage?" "No, nothing. I married Villiers. I met a girl of the strangest, most incredible beauty. I don't even know how old she was. 19 maybe when I met her. My friends had met her in Florence. She said she was an orphan. English father, Italian mother. She charmed all of them. She charmed me. The first time I saw her was at a party. I was by the door, and over the noise I heard her voice. She was singing, and it went straight through my heart. 3 months later I married her. His voice dropped. Villiers, that woman, if she was a woman, destroyed my soul. Our wedding night, I sat in her room and listened to her talk. Just talk. In that beautiful voice. About things I wouldn't dare whisper out loud even now, alone in the dark. You think you know life. You think you know what goes on in this city day and night. I'm telling you, you can't imagine what I know. Not in your worst nightmare. I've seen things that make me stop in the middle of the street and wonder how a person can see them and stay alive. Within a year I was ruined, body and soul, body and soul. But the estate, the land, sold, all of it. The house, the fields, everything. And the money? She took it, all of it. And then she left you. She vanished one night. I don't know where she went. But I know that if I ever saw her again, it would kill me. The rest of my story doesn't matter. Just misery. You probably think I'm exaggerating. I'm not. I haven't told you half of it. I could tell you things that would convince you. But then you'd never have a happy day again. You'd spend the rest of your life the way I spend mine. Haunted. A man who's seen hell. Villiers took him back to his rooms and fed him. Herbert could barely eat. He sat by the fire, silent and hollow, and seemed relieved when Villiers finally gave him a little money and sent him off. By the way, Villiers said at the door, your wife's name. You said Helen? Helen what? She went by Helen Vaughn, but I don't know her real name. I don't think she had one. Not really. Only people have names, Villiers. That's all I can say. Good night. Herbert went out into the freezing dark, and Villiers went back to his fire. Something about the man had shaken him to the core. Not the rags, not the ruined face, but a kind of formless dread that clung to him like fog. Herbert had admitted his own guilt. The woman had corrupted him, he'd said, body and soul. And Villiers felt certain this man had taken part in things too evil for words. The story needed no proof. Herbert was the proof. A case like this, Villiers thought, is like a nest of boxes. You open one and there's a stranger one inside. Poor Herbert is just the outer box. There'll be worse ones underneath. A few days later, at his club, he ran into a man named Austin, famous for knowing everything about London's darker corners. Still turning Herbert over in his mind, Villiers asked casually, do you happen to know anything about a man named Charles Herbert? Austin turned and stared at him. Charles Herbert? Were you not in town 3 years ago? Then you never heard about the Paul Street case. It caused quite a sensation. What case? A gentleman, good position, no known enemies, was found dead. Stone dead in the sunken yard outside a house on Paul Street, off Tottenham Court Road. Early morning, some passerby spotted the body and fetched a policeman. The dead man hadn't been robbed. His papers showed he was a respectable, well-liked man of means. But here's the thing. The doctors couldn't agree how he died. There were faint bruises on his shoulders, as if he'd been shoved out a door, but nothing that could have killed him. No wound, no poison, nothing. The house was number 20. It was occupied by a Mr. and Mrs. Charles Herbert. Both denied knowing the dead man, and with no evidence they were let go. But odd things came out. The neighbors said number 20 had a bad feeling about it. People didn't like to be seen going in. Nothing you could pin down, just that the Herberts were queer. The police were morally certain the man died somehow inside that house and was dumped in the yard. They just couldn't prove it. But here's what stuck with me. I knew one of the doctors who examined the body. Later I asked him, "Did you really never figure out the cause of death?" And he said, "Oh, I know exactly what killed him. He died of fright. Sheer, absolute terror. I've never seen a face so horribly contorted in my life, and I've seen a lot of dead faces." He was normally a cool man, that doctor. But there was real heat in the way he said it, and I couldn't get another word out of him. Austin looked at Villiers. "Do you know anything about Herbert?" "He was an old college friend of mine." "You don't say. Did you ever see his wife?" "No. I lost track of him for years." Strange, isn't it? Losing a man at the college gate and finding him again in a place like that. But I'd have liked to see Mrs. Herbert. People said extraordinary things about her. Everyone who saw her in court said the same impossible thing, that she was the most beautiful woman they'd ever seen, and the most repulsive at the same time. One man tried to describe her to me and just shuddered. Couldn't say why. She was some kind of enigma, and I'll bet if that dead man could talk, he'd have told some very strange tales. "An extraordinary case," Villiers said. "Well, I must be off." And he walked home thinking about his nest of boxes. Here was a stranger one already. A few months later, Villiers came to see Clark. Clark had spent a whole week keeping himself away from the memoirs, proud of his self-control, trying to talk himself out of the last case he'd written down, the one that wouldn't leave him alone. He was working on rationalizing it when the knock came. "Mr. Villiers to see you, sir." "Villiers, good of you to look me up." "It's been a year nearly. Come in. Do you want advice about investments?" "No, thanks. I've come to consult you about something rather strange. You'll probably think it's absurd. I half do myself, which is exactly why I've come to you. You're a practical man." Clark had no idea Villiers knew anything about the supernatural. "Happy to help. What's the case?" "It's an extraordinary thing. You know my habit. I keep my eyes open in the streets. I've stumbled on some strange people in my time, but this one beats all. A few months back, coming out of a restaurant on a foul winter night, a beggar came up to me, and the beggar turned out to be an old college friend of mine, a man named Herbert. I asked how he'd fallen so far, and he told me. We walked the dark Soho streets, and he told me his story. Villiers repeated it. The beautiful young wife, the corruption, body and soul, the ruin, the way the man's presence had chilled his blood. "Isn't this a little fanciful, Villiers?" Clark said. "The poor man made a bad marriage and went to pieces. Listen to this then." And Villiers told him Austin's story. The dead man in the yard of number 20. The doctor's verdict. Died of terror. "So there's not much doubt," Villiers finished. "Whoever that man was, he saw something so horrible it killed him, and he saw it in that house. So I got curious. I went to look at the place myself." He leaned forward. Number 20 was empty, to let. I got the key from the agent. Now, I've always liked going through empty houses. There's a fascination to the bare rooms, the dust. But I didn't enjoy number 20. The moment I stepped into the hall, the air felt wrong, heavy. All empty houses are stuffy, but this was something else, like it stopped my breath. Every room had it. But one room on the first floor was the worst. I felt my teeth grinding just putting my hand on the door. When I went in, I nearly fainted. There was nothing to see. Old wallpaper, peeling paint. But the room was full of horror. I stood against the wall with my heart pounding like I was dying, wondering what in God's name there was about an empty room to do that to me. He paused. There was a pile of old newspapers in one corner, 3, 4 years old. I started turning them over, and among them I found a drawing, a sketch. I'll show you in a minute. But I couldn't stay in that room. It was crushing me. I barely made it back out into the street. People stared. One man said I was drunk. I was staggering. I got the key back to the agent and went home, and I was in bed for a week. Nervous shock, the doctor called it. While I was recovering, I saw a small item in the paper. Starved to death. A locked room in a Marylebone lodging house. A dead man in his chair when they broke in. The dead man's name was Charles Herbert. Once, it said, a prosperous country gentleman whose name had been connected 3 years earlier with the mysterious death in Paul Street. And that's the story, Clark said quietly. That's the story. Well, I hardly know what to say, Villiers. There are peculiar details, certainly, but it's all conceivable in a straightforward way. And your feelings in that house, I'd put those down to imagination. You'd been brooding on what you'd heard. Herbert's dead now. Where do you even propose to look? I propose to look for the woman, the one he married. She's the mystery. They sat in silence. Clark privately congratulated himself on holding the line as the reasonable man. Villiers stared into the fire. I think I'll have a cigarette, he said at last, reaching into his pocket. Then he stopped. I forgot. I've got something to show you. The sketch I found among those newspapers. Here. He drew out a small parcel wrapped in brown paper and tissue, worked at the knots, and handed the little paper to Clark without a word. There was dead silence in the room for 5 minutes. The two men sat so still they could hear the clock ticking in the hall, and in one of them, that slow ticking woke a memory from far away. Clark was staring at the small pen and ink sketch of a woman's head. It had been drawn with great care by a real artist. The soul seemed to look out through the eyes, and the lips were parted in a strange smile. And as he looked, another evening rose up in his mind. Long ago, a valley, a river winding through the hills, a dull red sun, white mist off the water. A voice across the years. Clark, Mary will see the godpan. And then he was back in that gray room, watching the figure in the green chair. Mary sitting up, Mary's eyes meeting his, and his heart going cold. Who is this woman? He said at last. His voice was dry. That's the woman Herbert married. Clark looked again, and it wasn't Mary. It was Mary's face, but there was something else in it now. Something that hadn't been there when the girl in white walked into that laboratory, or even when she woke screaming, or when she lay grinning on the bed. Whatever it was, in the eyes, in the smile, it made Clark shudder to the depths of his soul. And he thought, without meaning to, of Phillips's words, the most vivid impression of pure evil I have ever seen. He turned the paper over and fell back with a groan, letting it drop. Good God, Clark, what's wrong? You've gone white as death. I'm not well. I get these attacks. Pour me a little wine. Thanks. I'll be all right in a minute. Villiers picked up the fallen sketch and turned it over, the way Clark had. You saw that, he said. That's how I identified her. Her name's written on the back. I don't quite follow. What was written? One word. Helen. Didn't I tell you her name was Helen? Helen Vaughn. Clark groaned. There was no more doubt. Now, don't you agree, Villiers said, that there are some very strange points in this story, and in the part this woman plays? Yes, Clark muttered. A strange story indeed. Give me time to think it over. I may be able to help you, or I may not. You're going? Good night, Villiers. Come see me in a week. You know, Austin, Villiers said, as the two of them walked along Piccadilly one pleasant May morning, I'm convinced that whole Paul Street business you told me about is just one episode in a much bigger story. I should confess, when I asked you about Herbert a few months back, I'd just seen him. Seen him? Where? He begged from me in the street one night. In a terrible state. I recognized him and got his story out of him. In short, he'd been ruined by his wife. How? He wouldn't say. Only that she'd destroyed him, body and soul. He's dead now. And I mean to find the woman. I put the whole case to a man named Clark, a dry, businesslike fellow, but shrewd, and someone who really knows something about people. He was clearly rattled by it, said it needed thought, and told me to come back in a week. A few days later, I got this. Austin took the letter and read it. Dear Villiers, I've thought over what you told me. My advice is this. Throw the portrait in the fire and put the whole story out of your mind. Never think about it again, or you'll be sorry. You'll assume I'm keeping some secret from you, and to a point that's true. But I only know a little. I'm like a man who looked over the edge of a cliff and pulled back in terror. What I know is horrible enough. Beyond it are things worse still, more incredible than any story ever told around a winter fire. I've decided to go no further, and nothing will change that. If you value your peace of mind, make the same decision. Come see me by all means, but we'll talk about something more cheerful. Austin folded it. Extraordinary letter. What does he mean, the portrait? Ah, I forgot to tell you. I went back to Paul Street and I made a discovery. And Villiers told him about the empty house, the room of horror, the sketch he'd found. Austin looked puzzled. How strange that you'd feel something so awful in that room. It sounds like more than imagination, like real physical revulsion. It was physical. It was like breathing in some poison with every breath, like it went into my nerves and bones. I felt racked head to foot. My eyes started to go dim, like death coming in. They'd turned without noticing up Ashley Street, a long, gloomy street, though here and there a house had been brightened up with flowers and cheerful paint. Villiers glanced up at one of them, red and white geraniums drooping from every windowsill, warm yellow curtains. Cheerful looking, isn't it? He said, and more cheerful inside, I hear. One of the most popular houses of the season, a Mrs. Beaumont's. Wealthy woman. Came from South America, they say. Some of the best people have taken her up. She's supposed to have this incredible wine, 1,000-year-old wine. She told Lord Argentine it was 1,000 years old, dead serious, offered to show him the jar. Austin shrugged. An odd sort of woman. Here we are, my rooms. Come up. Austin's rooms were richly, strangely furnished, every object seeming to sit apart, keeping its own character. After a while, he said, I've got something to show you. Did you know Arthur Machen, the painter? A little. What's become of him? I haven't heard his name in a while. He's dead. You don't say. He was young. 30. I don't know what killed him. He was a good friend. Used to come here and talk for hours. About 18 months ago, he was overworked. So on my suggestion, he went off traveling. No fixed plan. New York first, I think. I never heard from him. Then 3 months ago, I got this book, with a note from an English doctor in Buenos Aires. Said he'd treated Merrick before his death, and that Merrick's dying wish was that this be sent to me. He unlocked a carved chest and drew out a thick volume. Villiers opened it at random. Not a printed book, then? No. Drawings, black and white, by Merrick. The first page was blank. The second had a line of Latin, and on the third was an image that made Villiers look up sharply. But Austin was staring absently out the window. Villiers turned the pages, pulled in against his will. It was a whole nightmare set down in hard black ink, figures of fauns and satyrs, a dance on a mountaintop, scenes on lonely shores and in dark vineyards, a world the human soul shrank back from. He flipped faster. He'd seen enough. But the picture on the last page stopped him cold. A woman's face. Alone on the white paper. Austin, do you know who that is? No, of course not. I do. It's Mrs. Herbert. Are you sure? Completely. Poor Merrick. He's one more chapter in her story. He shut the book. Lock it away, Austin. If I were you, I'd burn it. It must be a terrible thing to have in the house, even in a chest. But what's the connection? Between Merrick and Mrs. Herbert? Or between her and these drawings? Who can say? Maybe it ends here and we never know. But I don't think so. This Helen Vaughan, Mrs. Herbert, is only the beginning. She'll come back to London, Austin. Depend on it. And when she does, we'll hear more. I doubt it'll be pleasant. Lord Argentine was one of the most popular men in London society. He'd been born poor, a younger son's grandson, carrying a great family name and no money to match it. But one by one, the lives standing between him and the fortune had fallen away. Fever, war, chance. Until one morning he woke up Lord Argentine, rich at 30. He decided that if he'd enjoyed being poor, he'd enjoy being rich twice as much. He threw famous dinners. An invitation to Argentine's table became one of the most wanted things in the city. 10 years on, he was still the best company in London, the man who made everyone around him happier, which is why his sudden death hit so hard. People couldn't believe it, even with the newspaper in front of them. Mysterious death of a nobleman. Lord Argentine, found dead by his valet. There was no doubt he'd taken his own life, but no one could name a single reason why. He was rich, admired, seemingly in love with his life. There was no scandal, no hidden trouble, nothing. The night before, he dined out and seemed exactly himself. The theory settled on was a sudden, inexplicable fit of self-destruction, a one-off tragedy. Except it wasn't a one-off. Within 3 weeks, 3 more men died the same way. Different homes, same impossible circumstances. Wealthy men, respected men, men with everything to live for and not one shred of a motive between them. each one alive and cheerful in the evening, each one found dead in the morning, his face frozen in terror. The police, who couldn't solve the murders in the East End, were completely helpless here, because there was no crime to solve, no attacker, no reason. Just prosperous men, one after another, choosing a horrible death for no cause anyone could find. A kind of horror settled over the West End. Men looked at each other in the street and wondered who'd be next. Every morning the paper was opened with dread. Not long after the last of them, Austin came to see Villiers and asked whether he'd turned up anything more on Helen Vaughan. No, Villiers said. Clark won't budge, and my other channels have come to nothing. She seems to have vanished after Paul Street, gone abroad, I think. But honestly, I've barely thought about it these last weeks. I knew Harry's well, one of the men who died. It shook me. I can imagine, Austin said grimly. Argentine was a friend of mine. We were actually talking about him that day at my rooms. Yes, about Mrs. Beaumont's house in Ashley Street. You said Argentine dined there? Quite. He dined there the night before he died. They kept the name out of the papers to spare Mrs. Beaumont. He was a great favorite of hers. They say she was in a terrible state afterward. A strange look crossed Villiers's face. He seemed to be deciding whether to speak. Austin went on. I've never felt such horror as when I read about Argentine's death. I knew the man. I can't conceive of any reason he'd choose to die that way. You know how people gossip in this city. Any hidden scandal would have surfaced. Nothing has. And the sudden mania theory is fine for a coroner's jury, but everyone knows it's nonsense. He fell silent, then tried to shake it off and talk of lighter things. That Mrs. Beaumont, though, she's a great success. Taken London by storm. I met her the other night. A remarkable woman. Handsome, I suppose you'd say. And yet there's something in her face I didn't like. The features are exquisite, but the expression is strange. And the whole time I was looking at her, and afterward walking home, I had the oddest feeling that I'd seen that expression somewhere before, like a dim, far-off memory, the way things in a dream feel familiar. You've met Mrs. Beaumont, Villiers said slowly. Yes. Why? Just then a noise rose from down the street, shouting, growing louder, rolling up from the east. Newsboys. The cries came clearer as they approached. West End horror, another death, full details. Austin ran down and bought a paper and read it aloud. A fifth man, Mr. Sidney Crashaw of Fulham and Devon, found dead in his own garden at 1 o'clock that afternoon. He'd dined at his club the night before, in his usual health and spirits, left around 10, been seen walking up St. James's Street shortly after. After that, nothing. No trouble, no anxiety of any kind that anyone knew. The fifth in a month. The police could offer no explanation. Austin put the paper down, sick. I'm leaving London tomorrow. It's a city of nightmares. This is horrible, Villiers. But Villiers was sitting quietly by the window, looking out into the street. He'd listened closely, and the look of indecision was gone from his face now. Wait a moment, Austin. There's something I've decided to tell you. That report says Crashaw was last seen alive in St. James's Street, just after 10. Yes, I can contradict that. Crashaw was seen much later than that. I saw him myself, at 2 o'clock this morning. You saw him? Where? near here. In Ashley Street. He was just leaving a house. What house? Mrs. Beaumont's. Villiers, that's impossible. Think what you're saying. How could Crashaw be at Mrs. Beaumont's at 2 a.m? You must have been dreaming. I was wide awake, and even if I'd been half asleep, what I saw would have snapped me out of it. What you saw? What did you see? I'll tell you, and you can judge for yourself. The noise in the street had died away. A heavy, leaden quiet had settled in, the stillness after a storm. Villiers turned from the window. I was coming home late from a house near Regent's Park. Clear night, so I decided to walk. After a few minutes, I had the streets almost to myself. It's a strange thing, being alone in London at night. The gas lamps stretching away, the dead silence. As the clock struck 2, I turned down Ashley Street. Quieter than ever there, and darker. I'd gone about halfway when I heard a door close very softly, and I looked up to see who else was out at that hour. There's a street lamp right by the house in question, and a man was standing on the step. He'd just shut the door, and his face was turned toward me. It was Crashaw. I'd never spoken to him, but I'd seen him often. There was no mistake. I looked at his face for a moment, and then, I'll admit it, I turned and ran all the way to my own door. Why? Because his face made my blood run cold. I would never have believed a human face could hold what was in that man's eyes. Every foul thing at once, hate like fire, and hunger, and the loss of every hope, and a horror that seemed to be screaming even though his teeth were shut, and under it all, total black despair. I knew I was looking at a soul that was already lost. The body was still standing there, but everything inside it was gone. I don't know exactly when he died. An hour later, maybe 2. But I know that when I passed him on that step and heard the door shut, that man no longer belonged to this world. It was a devil's face I was looking at. There was a long silence. Austin had bowed his head, his hand over his eyes. "What does it mean?" he said at last. "Who knows? It's a black business, but I think we keep it to ourselves for now. I'll see what I can learn about that house through quiet channels. If I find anything, I'll tell you." 3 weeks later, Austin got a note from Villiers asking him to come by. He found him at the window as usual, a neat stack of papers on the little table beside him. "Any discoveries?" Austin asked. "I think so. A few things worth your attention. But first, I found out who Mrs. Beaumont is." "Who?" "You and I know her better under another name." Villiers paused. "Herbert. Herbert." Austin repeated, stunned. "Yes, Mrs. Herbert of Paul Street. Helen Vaughan of earlier adventures I know nothing about. Go home and look at the face in Merrick's book, and you'll understand why she seemed familiar to you. And you have proof? The best proof. I've seen her. Not where you'd expect a lady from Ashley Street. I saw her going into a house in one of the meanest streets in Soho. I'd set up to be there, not to meet her, but she came, right on time. But I've met this woman, Villiers, in an ordinary drawing room, talking, laughing, drinking coffee with ordinary people. I know what I'm saying. I didn't jump to it. I followed the trail. I went down into the worst parts of the city, because I figured a woman whose record was as dirty as hers must have moved through dirtier circles before her present ones. If you see mud on the surface of a stream, it was on the bottom once. So I went to the bottom. The people down there know me. I've done a few of them favors, and they knew I had nothing to do with the police, so they talked. It took a while to land what I wanted, and when I did, I didn't even realize at first it was my fish. The story was this. 5 or 6 years ago, a young woman named Raymond showed up in that quarter. 17, 18, beautiful. Looked like she came from the country. She lived there about a year, doing things the person telling me, no saint himself, went sick just describing. Then she vanished. Came back around the time of the Paul Street case. Vanished again. Came back a few months ago, renting rooms she visited 2 or 3 times a week, always at 10 in the morning. I arranged to be watching with a guide at 9:45 on the right day. She came right on time. She saw us and gave me a look I won't forget for a long while. But that look was all I needed. I knew this Miss Raymond was Mrs. Herbert. Mrs. Beaumont had gone clean out of my head. She went in. I waited till 4. She came out and I followed her. A long chase, Strand, Westminster, St. James's, Piccadilly, and then she turned up Ashley Street. My stomach turned. She stopped at the house with the flowers and the yellow curtains. The house Crashaw walked out of the night he died. And then, while I stood there, a man I know tipped his hat to her. I asked who she was, and he said, "Mrs. Beaumont, lives in Ashley Street." After that, there was no doubt at all. So I decided I had enough to take to Clark. Why Clark? Because Clark knows things about this woman that I don't. My idea is that Clark and I go to see Mrs. Beaumont together. You'd go into that house? No. Villiers, you can't. Think of what happened to the men who... Let me finish. There's more. It's been completed in an extraordinary way. Villiers picked up the neat little bundle of manuscript, tied with red tape. It's an account of the entertainment, Mrs. Beaumont laid on for a chosen few of her guests. The man who wrote it escaped with his life. Barely. The doctors say the shock to his nerves was so severe he won't live long. Read it. Austin took the pages and opened them at random. His eye caught one word, and the phrase after it. And he went white, cold sweat running down his temples, and threw the paper down. Take it away, Villiers. Never speak of this again. Are you made of stone? The worst dread of death itself is nothing next to this. I won't read it. I'd never sleep again. All right. I can imagine what you saw. It's horrible enough. But it's an old story, really. An ancient thing, played out in our own day, in dim London streets instead of among the old vineyards. We know what happened to the people who met the great god Pan. Some things can't be named, can't be spoken, only pointed at under a symbol, a figure of speech. But you and I, we've learned a little about the terror that can live in the secret places of life, wearing human skin, that which has no form, taking a form. How can the sun keep shining over a thing like that, Austin? How doesn't the ground melt under it? Villiers was pacing now, sweat on his forehead. Austin sat silent. I'll say it again, Villiers. You'll never go into that house. You'd never come out alive. Yes, Austin, I'll come out alive. I and Clark with me. We're going to give her a choice. What do you mean, a choice? This morning the air was fresh, and I felt like walking. Piccadilly was bright, the sun on the carriages and the leaves in the park, people smiling up at the sky, and somehow I drifted out of all that brightness and found myself in a dull, dead little street where there seemed to be no sun and no air. I don't know what led me there, but I stopped in front of a dusty old shop, 200 years old, black with the grime of countless winters, and I felt a cold shudder go through me, and I knew I'd found what I came for. It took me 5 minutes to steady myself enough to walk in and ask for it in a calm voice. The old man behind the counter looked at me oddly as he wrapped it. I got out and walked fast, glad to get back to the noise and the light. He pulled open a drawer and showed Austin what he'd bought, the means by which Helen Vaughn would be given the chance to end things herself, in a locked room, alone. Austin stared at it, whiter and whiter. "You wouldn't do it," he murmured. "You wouldn't have blood on your hands. My God, Villiers, you can't mean to make yourself an executioner." "No. I'll offer her a choice and leave her alone for 15 minutes. If it isn't done when we go back in, I call the nearest policeman. That's all. I have to go. I can't stay here. Good night." The door shut, then opened again. Austin stood in the doorway, ghastly. "I forgot. I have something to tell you too. A letter from Dr. Harding in Buenos Aires. He treated Merrick for 3 weeks before he died. Does he say what killed a man in the prime of life? Fever? No, not fever. A total collapse of the whole system, the doctor says. Probably brought on by some severe shock. Merrick would tell him nothing, but the doctor ends the letter like this. He knew almost no one out here, except one person who didn't bear the best character, and who has since left. A Mrs. Vaughn. Among the papers of the well-known physician Dr. Robert Matheson of Ashley Street, who died suddenly in early 1892, a single sheet of manuscript was found, covered in hurried pencil notes in abbreviated Latin. It was deciphered only with difficulty. A few words have never been made out. The date on it is July 25th, 1888. What follows is a translation. Whether science would gain anything from these notes, if they were published, I don't know. I doubt it. But I will never take on the responsibility of publishing a word of what is written here. Partly because of the oath I gave to the 2 people present, and partly because the details are too abominable. I will probably destroy this paper someday, or leave it sealed to my friend, to use or burn as he sees fit. I did everything my training suggested to be sure I was under no illusion. At first I was too astounded to think. But within a minute I was certain my pulse was steady, that I was in my right senses. Then I fixed my eyes calmly on what was in front of me. Though horror and a sick revulsion rose up in me, and a smell of corruption choked my breath, I held firm. And I was privileged, or cursed, I don't know which, to see the thing on the bed change before my eyes. The skin, the flesh, the muscle, the bone, the whole firm structure of the body that I had always believed was fixed and permanent, began to melt and dissolve. I know a body can be broken into its elements by outside forces. But this was something inside it, some inner force I know nothing of, driving the change. And here in front of me, all the work by which a human being had been made was undone, and redone, and undone again. I saw the form waver from one sex to the other, divide from itself, and rejoin. I saw it sink down to the level of the beast it had risen from, and then lower still, down toward the very bottom of all being. But the thing that makes life, that holds a shape together, stayed there the whole time, while the outward form kept changing. The light in the room had turned to blackness, not the darkness of night, in which you see things dimly, but the pure negation of light. And yet I could see everything clearly. I watched until at last there was nothing there but a kind of jelly, and then the ladder was climbed again. Here the manuscript is unreadable. And for one instant I saw a form, shaped dimly in front of me, which I will not describe. And as the last unspeakable shape, neither man nor beast, resolved back into human form, there came finally death. I who saw all this, with great horror and loathing of my own soul, sign my name here, and declare that everything I have written is true. Robert Matheson, M.D. And so, Raymond, that is what I know and what I saw. The weight of it was too much to carry alone, and there was no one but you I could tell. Villiers, who was with me at the end, knows nothing of the other thing, the thing I saw in the wood all those years ago, the thing that lay down on the sweet summer grass, half in sun and half in shadow, and held the girl Rachel's hand, and called to its companions, and gave solid shape, right there on the ground we walk on, to a horror I can only point at. I never told Villiers that, nor the resemblance, the one that struck me like a blow to the heart when I saw the portrait, and filled the cup of terror at the very end. I don't dare guess what it means. I know that what I watched die was not Mary, and yet in the last agony, Mary's eyes looked into mine. I've been in the country these last few days. You can guess where. While all London was talking of Mrs. Beaumont, I wrote to my friend Dr. Phillips and asked him the name of the village where the events he'd told me about had happened. He gave it, the more willingly because Rachel's parents were both dead now, of grief and horror at what became of their daughter, and the rest of the family had gone abroad. So I went there. I stood beneath the crumbling Roman walls, white with 1700 winters, and looked across the meadow where the old temple of the god of the deep once stood, and saw, gleaming in the sun, the house where Helen had lived. I stayed several days. The local people knew little and had guessed less. To them it was a commonplace village tragedy. I spent most of my time in the great wood that rises above the village, and at last I climbed to the top of the hill and stood on the old Roman road that runs along the highest ridge, the green causeway where Helen and Rachel had walked. I followed in their steps, and I came to the place where the track widens into an open clearing walled in by thick undergrowth, then narrows again and disappears into the blue haze of summer heat. Into that pleasant green clearing, a girl named Rachel walked one day, and out of it she came again, changed into who can say what. I didn't stay there long. In a small town nearby, there's a museum of Roman finds. The day after I arrived, I went and looked through it, and near the end I was shown a small square pillar of white stone, recently dug up in that same wood, in that same clearing where the Roman road broadens out. On one side was an inscription. Some letters were worn away, but the meaning is clear enough. To the great god Nodens, the god of the great deep, the abyss, Flavius Senelus raised this pillar on account of the marriage he saw beneath the shade. The museum's keeper told me the local scholars were baffled, not by the words, but by what rite or event the inscription could possibly be describing. And now, Clark, as to what you tell me, that you saw Helen Vaughn die in circumstances of almost unbelievable horror. I was interested, but most of it, all of it really, I already knew. I can explain the strange resemblance you saw in the portrait and in the living face. You have seen Helen's mother. You remember that still summer night, so many years ago, when I talked to you about the world beyond the shadows and the god Pan. You remember Mary. She was the mother of Helen Vaughn, who was born 9 months after that night. Mary never recovered her mind. She lay as you saw her, and a few days after the child was born, she died. I think at the very last she knew me. The old look came into her eyes for a second, and then she shuddered and groaned and was gone. It was an evil thing I did that night, with you standing there. I broke open the door of the house of life without knowing or caring what might come through it. I remember you told me, sharply and rightly, that I had destroyed a human being's mind with a reckless experiment. You were right to blame me, but my theory was not all nonsense. What I said Mary would see, she saw. I only forgot that no human eyes can look on such a sight and live. And I forgot that when the door is thrown open like that, something may come in, something we have no name for, and human flesh may become the veil for a horror no one dares to speak. I played with forces I didn't understand, and you have seen the end of it. Helen did well to die, horrible as her death was. I knew what I had done the moment the child was born, and when she was barely 5 years old, I caught her, more than once, with a companion in the woods. You can guess what kind. She was a living horror to me. After a few years I couldn't bear it, and I sent her away. You know now what frightened the boy in the wood. And now Helen is with her companions. The end. Note: Helen Vaughn was born August 5th, 1865, and died July 25th, 1888, in her house in the street off Piccadilly called Ashley Street. Source: The Great God Pan by Arthur Machen, first published 1894. Public domain worldwide. Author died 1947. This modernized retelling is an original derivative work, free to narrate, publish, and monetize.